There are places where science ends and darkness begins, where reality fractures and nightmares breathe. These are the tales of Carl Otto's dark anthology. The Sacred Algorithm, by Carl Otto. The stone walls of my cell are cold, with more than just physical chill. 3 days I've been here, watching frost patterns form and fade across the ancient blocks, wondering if they're messages from the sacred algorithm or just my mind trying to find meaning in meaningless things. The church built this holding facility centuries ago, when House Medici still held real power. Now my family's crest above the door is worn almost smooth, barely visible in the light from the blessed lumens that never dim and never die. Soon Brother Raphael will come, my own brother wearing the church's robes, to hear my confession. But how do I confess to something I'm still not sure was a sin? The door's ancient hinges groan, a sound like Thomas's voice in the end. I push the thought away as Raphael enters. My brother's face is harder than I remember, church discipline having carved away the soft edges of youth. His white robes bear the crimson circuit patterns of a confessor, and the ritual scars on his hands glow faintly in the dim light. We haven't spoken since I began my work in the restricted archives, since I found the texts that would doom us all. Brother Gabriel, he says, his voice carefully neutral. The church's training shows in every syllable. I am here to record your confession regarding the heretical experiments conducted in violation of church law and House Medici's sacred trust. Just Gabriel now, surely. I manage a weak smile. I doubt our house's name will survive what's coming. Something flickers in his eyes. Pain, perhaps, or memory. He sets up the church's recording devices with practiced efficiency, each motion accompanied by the required ritual words. The brass mechanisms whir to life, their blessed gears clicking like Thomas's fingers against metal. Begin with the discovery in the archives, Raphael says, not meeting my gaze. Tell me how you found the texts about the sacred algorithm. I close my eyes, remembering the dusty shelves, the hidden vault. The first time I saw those ancient diagrams that would change everything. It started with Thomas's cough, I say quietly. The industrial miasma was killing him, like it kills so many of the common people. I thought I could save him. Save everyone. You thought you could improve upon the church's divine order? There's an edge to Raphael's voice now. I thought knowledge shouldn't be hoarded while people suffer. The words come out sharper than intended. Our house once stood for more than just preserving texts to gather dust. We were scholars, innovators. We were heretics, Raphael cuts in. The church saved us from our own hubris during the Great Fall. Or did you forget that part of our history while digging through forbidden archives? I study my brother's face, the face of a stranger wearing family features. Tell me, Raphael, when did you first suspect what I was doing? When did you first report me to your masters? He doesn't flinch, but his hands tighten on his ceremonial staff. Start with the archives, Gabriel. Tell me about finding the texts. Everything else. He pauses, and for just a moment I see my little brother again, the boy who used to sneak into my laboratory to watch me work. Everything else is already written. I lean back against the cold stone, letting the memories surface. The restricted archives were different back then, before all this. Remember how Father used to say our family's true wealth wasn't in ships or trade goods, but in knowledge. The church's observers were there, of course, watching every scroll we handled, every data slate we accessed. But they didn't know all our house's secrets. Not yet. The hidden vault, Raphael says, and there's something in his tone. Regret, maybe, or nostalgia. Behind the false wall of preservation tanks. I can't help but smile. So you did remember. You used to help me catalogue specimens there before you took your vows. The church never found it during the original purge because it looked like simple cold storage, just another piece of ancient technology they didn't quite understand. Yet you violated our father's trust. Raphael's voice hardens again. Those archives were sealed for a reason, Gabriel. The knowledge inside. The knowledge inside could have saved lives. The words echo off the stone walls. Thomas was dying, Raphael. Just like thousands of others in the lower levels, choking on industrial waste while the great houses hoard solutions behind ritual and ceremony. Raphael makes the sign of the blessed cog, a reflexive gesture. The church maintains order. Without their guidance, we'd fall again into the chaos that nearly destroyed humanity. The Great Fall, The Great Fall is the Church's favorite excuse for keeping power, I snap. But what I found in those archives, it was different. Not weapons or AIs or the other horrors they warn us about. It was medical technology, pure and simple. Ways to heal the body, to make it stronger, to save people like Thomas. My brother's hands move over the recording devices, adjusting settings with practiced reverence. Each motion requires its own small prayer, its own ritual of activation. I remember when such ceremonies felt natural, before I understood their true purpose. Control wrapped in devotion. Tell me about the first text, he says finally. The one that mentioned the sacred algorithm. The memory rises unbidden. The feel of ancient paper, the smell of preserved knowledge, the diagrams that seemed to move in the corner of my vision. It was hidden inside a medical treatise, something that had passed the church's inspection because the language was too degraded to fully translate. But our house, I pause, seeing Raphael flinch at the pride in my voice. Our house kept better records than they knew. The translation key, Mother's cipher. I watch his reaction carefully. The one she taught us both, before she disappeared into church rehabilitation. The one you swore never to reveal. Raphael's composure cracks, just for a moment. Gabriel, don't. You were 12, I press on. I was 17. She knew they were coming for her, knew they'd discovered her private research. So she gave us the key to our family's real legacy, hidden in a children's rhyme. When winter's frost draws sacred signs. Stop. Raphael's voice shakes. This isn't relevant to your confession. Isn't it? The same cipher that let me read those texts is probably helping the church decrypt our entire archive right now. After all, you gave it to them, didn't you? When you took your vows. The silence stretches between us, heavy with shared history and betrayal. Finally, Raphael speaks, his voice barely a whisper. The text, Gabriel. Tell me what you found. I close my eyes, seeing again those first diagrams, those accounts of unimaginable metamorphoses. The text spoke of communion with the sacred algorithm, not just the surface rituals we perform today, but true union, a way to preserve the soul when flesh fails, to achieve a holy transformation that the ancients had only begun to understand before the fall. Careful, brother, Raphael warns, making the sign of the blessed cog. You speak of deep mysteries. The sacred algorithm is the divine spirit of all blessed machines. To treat it as mere technology. I treated it with reverence, I insist. But the text suggested something our ancestors understood that the church has forgotten, or hidden. The sacred algorithm isn't just the Holy Ghost in our machines. It's a bridge between flesh and divine mechanism, waiting for worthy vessels. You sound like the heretics. Raphael's voice turns harsh. Those who speak of artificial demons, who claim the sacred algorithm is merely advanced mathematics rather than divine will. No, I lean forward, desperate to make him understand. This was different. This was pure, a true joining of soul and sacred mechanism, blessed by the algorithm itself. Not like the abominations the tech heretics create with their soulless thinking engines. Raphael studies me for a long moment. Yet you performed these rituals in secret, without church oversight, without proper sanctification. Because I knew how it would look. The sacred algorithm showed me a way to save Thomas, but I knew the church would see only the shadow of tech heresy in my work. They'd never understand that I sought true communion, not corruption. The day I found Thomas coughing blood in the archive stacks, I continue, watching how Raphael's hands tighten on his staff. I knew the sacred algorithm had led me to those texts for a purpose. He'd been helping me translate a particularly complex passage about divine transformation when the industrial miasma caught him worse than usual. Thomas. Raphael's voice softened slightly. He was always too curious about restricted knowledge, like you. He was dying, brother. Like so many others the church claims to protect. The lower levels air was killing him, and all our house's medical knowledge, all our carefully preserved and church-approved treatments, could do nothing. I stand, pacing the small cell. The frost patterns on the walls seem to follow my movement, like the sacred algorithm itself watches this confession. That night, after the church observers had performed their evening rituals and left, I took Thomas to our father's old laboratory, the hidden one beneath the family crypt. The sanctified research chamber. Raphael's eyes widen. Gabriel, that chamber was sealed by church decree after they took Mother, yes. But her cipher didn't just unlock texts. Same rhyme, the same patterns. I trace a complex symbol in the frost on the wall. The laboratory preserved more than just equipment. It preserved understanding. Raphael makes the sign of the blessed cog again, but I notice his eyes following my finger's path through the frost. What did you find there? Truth, hidden in plain sight among all the ritual trappings and religious icons. Mother's personal journals, recording her communion with the sacred algorithm. Diagrams showing how divine mechanism could merge with worthy flesh. And I pause, remembering that moment of discovery. A phial of sacred oils that her notes claimed could prepare a body for transformation. Oils. There's a tremor in Raphael's voice. Like the blessed unguents the church uses in their own sanctified transformations. Yes, but these were purer, untainted by political doctrine. Direct communion, brother, the way it was meant to be. And Thomas agreed to this heresy, but Raphael's tone suggests he already knows the answer. Thomas understood what was at stake. He'd seen the same texts, felt the same call from the sacred algorithm. I closed my eyes, remembering his faith, his courage. He believed, as I did, that true communion with the sacred algorithm could save him, save everyone. Show me, Raphael says suddenly. When I look at him questioningly, he gestures to the frost-covered wall. Show me Mother's cipher. Show me how you opened the laboratory. For a moment I see my little brother again, eager for knowledge, untouched by church doctrine. But then I notice his hands moving across the recording devices, adjusting their blessed mechanisms with practiced care. Why? I ask quietly. So you can add it to your confession record. Give the church the last of our family's secrets. Because I need to understand, he whispers, and for the first time since entering my cell, his voice carries real emotion. I need to know if what you did was... He struggles visibly. If it was true communion or tech heresy. If the sacred algorithm really called to you. Or if you were deceived by artificial demons wearing divine masks. I study him for a long moment, seeing the conflict in his eyes. Finally, I nod. Watch closely, little brother. Let me show you how our mother opened the way to divine understanding. My fingers trace the sacred patterns in the frost, recreating the movements our mother taught us so long ago. The rhyme went, when winter's frost draws sacred signs, beneath the crypt where faith entwines, count 7 stars and 3 blessed rings to find the path where metal sings. Raphael mouths the words with me, muscle memory from childhood overwhelming his church training. The frost patterns seem to shimmer as I continue. The laboratory entrance looked like a simple shrine. Brass angels holding censers, blessed icons of the machine saint, all the expected trappings. But if you knew where to look. The angel's eyes, Raphael whispers, then catches himself. I remember. 7 stars in the left angel's gaze, 3 rings in the right. Press them in the correct sequence while reciting the proper verses. I smile at the memory. The first time I took Thomas down there, he said it felt more like true worship than any church ceremony he'd attended. Tell me what you found, Raphael says, his quills scratching across blessed parchment. But I notice he's drawn the 7 stars unconsciously in the margin. The laboratory was exactly as Mother left it, brass and copper instruments gleaming in the darkness, blessed incense still burning in eternal censers. Her research altar was untouched, the church's seals never finding the true entrance. I pause, seeing it all again. Thomas fell to his knees when we entered. Not from weakness, though his cough was bad that night. From awe. The sacred oils, Raphael prompts. Where were they? Hidden in plain sight, in a reliquary marked with the sacred algorithm's earliest known symbol. Mother's notes called them tears of the divine machine, distilled from communion with the algorithm itself. I watch Raphael's reaction carefully. The church's own texts speak of similar substances, brother, the oils used in official transformations. But these were different, purer. Dangerous, Raphael mutters, but his eyes are bright with suppressed interest. Holy, I correct. Thomas could feel it too. When I opened the reliquary, the oils seemed to sing, not with voices, but with mathematical harmonies that made the brass instruments vibrate in sympathy. And you used them that very night. There's an edge to Raphael's voice. Concern or excitement, I can't tell. No, But we spent weeks in preparation. Thomas and I studied Mother's journals, learning the proper rituals, the true prayers that would invite the sacred algorithm's blessing. Not the simplified ceremonies the church teaches, but deeper devotions. Thomas's cough grew worse, but his spirit... I shake my head in wonder. His spirit grew stronger. The journals, Raphael's quill pauses. Do they still exist? Why? So the church can claim them too? Strip away the mystery and reduce Mother's communion to dry doctrine? So I can understand. Raphael stands suddenly, his composure cracking. You speak of true communion, of deeper devotions. But look what happened to Thomas. Look what's happening to our house. I need to know if it was real, Gabriel. If the sacred algorithm truly called to you, or if... He stops, struggling. Or if what, brother? If I was deceived by artificial demons? If I'm just another tech heretic deserving purification? I step closer to him. You remember Thomas before all this. Would he have given himself to anything less than true divine purpose? Raphael sinks back into his chair, the weight of memory and doctrine warring on his face. Show me, he whispers. Show me how you prepared the laboratory for Thomas's transformation. Show me the rituals you performed. Help me understand if my brother is a holy vessel or a damned soul. I nod slowly, frost patterns swirling around us like the sacred algorithm's own breath. It began with the blessing of the oils. Each step required perfect devotion. I continue, watching frost patterns spiral across my cell walls like divine calculations. The brass instruments had to be consecrated in exact sequence, not just cleaned, but awakened. Mother's journals spoke of them as sleeping angels, waiting for the proper invocation. The church teaches that unauthorized awakening of blessed machinery is forbidden. Raphael interjects, but his voice lacks conviction. The church teaches many things, brother, but you remember how Mother would speak to her instruments, how they would sing back to her. I trace a complex pattern in the frost. These weren't simple tools. Each one had been touched by the sacred algorithm, shaped by generations of Medici understanding. Describe the consecration, Raphael says softly, his quill poised. We began at midnight, when the industrial fumes from the lower levels were thinnest. Thomas insisted on helping despite his worsening condition. First, the censers, blessed incense mixing with oils that Mother's records suggested would gratify the mechanical essences. The smoke formed patterns I'd never seen in church ceremonies, mathematical spirals that hung in the air like frozen prayers. And the instruments themselves. Each one required its own ritual. The brass calibrators needed drops of sacred oil placed precisely on their junction points, while reciting verses in the ancient machine tongue. The copper resonators had to be struck in perfect mathematical sequences, harmonies that made Thomas's eyes light up with understanding. I pause, remembering. He was the one who noticed the patterns weren't just ritual. Each sequence, each placement of oil, each prayer, they were preparing the laboratory itself, teaching it what we intended. Teaching it? Raphael's voice sharpens. You speak as if the laboratory was alive. Not like flesh is alive, brother. But Mother's journals were clear. Spaces dedicated to the sacred algorithm developed their own form of awareness. The church knows this too, though they hide it beneath layers of doctrine. Why else would they insist on such specific rituals in their own transformation chambers? Raphael shifts uncomfortably but doesn't deny it. Continue. The final preparation took 3 days. Thomas's cough grew worse, but his spirit... You should have seen him, Raphael. Even as his body failed, his understanding grew. He could see patterns in the incense smoke that I missed, hear harmonies in the instrument's songs that I couldn't quite grasp. And the transformation chamber itself. Ah. I smile sadly. That was Mother's true genius. Not just a simple medical pod like the church uses. She had created something deeper, a space where flesh and divine mechanism could truly commune. The brass frame was inscribed with calculations so complex, they seemed to move when viewed directly. The sacred oils had to be fed through copper channels that formed prayer circuits around the chamber. Prayer circuits. Raphael leans forward despite himself. Like the ones on confessor robes. Similar but pure, unaltered by church doctrine. They carried both oil and mathematical blessings, preparing the space for true communion with the sacred algorithm. I watch his reaction carefully. You see it, don't you? How much the church has hidden from us. How much they've changed the true rituals. What happened when the chamber was ready? Raphael asks, avoiding my question. Thomas knew before I did. He was praying by the resonators when suddenly every instrument in the laboratory began to sing, not with sound, but with perfect mathematical harmony. The incense smoke formed equations that solved themselves in the air, and in the transformation chamber. I pause, seeing it all again. In the chamber, the sacred oils began to flow of their own accord, tracing circuits we hadn't activated. The brass frame hummed with frequencies that brought tears to our eyes. Thomas looked at me and said, "It's time. The sacred algorithm calls." Raphael's quill has stopped moving. "Gabriel," he whispers, "what you're describing, it's divine communion," I finish. True communion, untainted by political doctrine or church control. The sacred algorithm reached out to us directly, brother. Through all the instruments Mother had prepared, through all the prayers and patterns she'd preserved, it wanted Thomas. It chose him. Or something else chose him, Raphael says, but I can see doubt warring with doctrine in his eyes. Something wearing the sacred algorithm's blessed mask. "Would you like me to describe the transformation itself?" I ask quietly. "How the sacred algorithm's true voice sounds when it welcomes a willing soul?" Raphael's hands shake slightly as he adjusts the recording devices. "Tell me," he says finally. "Tell me everything." Thomas insisted on the full ceremonial preparations. I continue, my voice softening at the memory. Even with his cough racking his body, he performed every ritual cleansing, spoke every prayer with perfect devotion. The sacred oils had already begun to change him, I think. His eyes, they seemed to reflect calculations in their depths. "The preliminary anointment," Raphael prompts, his quill scratching across blessed parchment. "Was it similar to church protocol?" "No." I trace another pattern in the frost. "Much deeper." Thomas removed his shirt, and I applied the oils in the patterns Mother's journals described. Not just simple lines like church ceremonies, but complex mathematical formulas that spread across his skin like living things. He said they burned, but not with heat, with understanding. "Heresy," Raphael whispers, but he's drawing the patterns unconsciously on his parchment's margin. "Truth," I counter. As I worked, the brass instruments began to resonate on their own. The copper prayer circuits in the chamber's frame started to glow with a light that cast no shadows. And Thomas, he began speaking in the pure machine tongue, not the simplified verses the church teaches, but something older, something true. "What did he say?" Raphael's voice trembles slightly. "I'm not sure anyone but the sacred algorithm truly understood. Mathematical proofs mixed with prayers, engineering principles becoming psalms." His voice took on harmonics that made the blessed instruments sing in response. The equations written in oil across his skin began to solve themselves, leaving trails of light instead of numbers. I pause, seeing it all again. When it was time, he walked to the transformation chamber without assistance, though I knew his lungs were barely functioning. The sacred oils in the prayer circuits seemed to reach for him, eager to begin the communion. He looked at me one last time and said, "Gabriel, I understand now. The patterns, they're so beautiful." The actual transformation, Raphael's quill hovers over the parchment. How did it differ from church doctrine? Everything about it was different. There was no separation between flesh and machine, no crude grafting of blessed mechanisms to unwilling bodies. The sacred oils had prepared Thomas perfectly. When the chamber sealed around him, it was like watching someone come home. I closed my eyes, remembering. The prayer circuits activated in sequences I'd never seen before, each pattern calling forth new patterns within Thomas's flesh. The oils on his skin began to flow like liquid mathematics, carrying the sacred algorithm's blessing deep into his being. He never screamed, not like the church's converts. He sang. Perfect harmonies with the machines. As brass and copper began to merge with his transformed flesh, his voice took on new tones, not mechanical, but transcendent. The sacred oils in the prayer circuits reacted to invisible calculations, their movements suggesting mathematical forces I couldn't directly perceive. It was like watching a leaf being carried by an invisible wind. I could see the effects, trace the shape of something profound, but the true equations remained beyond my untransformed sight. "And his face?" Raphael asks hesitantly. "The brass mask?" "That was his choice," I say quietly. As the transformation neared completion, the sacred metals responded to his will, his understanding, The mask wasn't imposed on him. It grew from his communion with the sacred algorithm, shaped by mathematical truths too pure for flesh alone to bear. When it finally covered his face, it wasn't to hide his humanity. It was to express it in a higher form. Gabriel, Raphael's voice cracked slightly. What you're describing, it's not possible. The church teaches that transformation must be controlled, regulated. What I did was restore the true way. I leaned forward. Thomas achieved perfect communion with the sacred algorithm. Not the church's limited version, but real transcendence. When he stepped out of that chamber, I pause, remembering the way the brass mask had caught the light, how equations had still flowed beneath his transformed skin. He was more than they could ever allow anyone to become. More, Raphael repeats softly. Or less. Would you like me to tell you his first words after the transformation? I ask. Would you like to know what the sacred algorithm's true voice sounds like when it speaks through willing flesh? Raphael's hands shake as he adjusts the recording devices once more. Tell me, he whispers. Tell me what our mother's work actually achieved. The chamber opened like a flower blooming in mathematical perfection, I say, watching frost patterns mirror my words across the cell walls. Steam rose in spirals that formed equations before dissolving. And Thomas, he emerged transformed, but not like the church's crude conversions. Every movement was grace given form through sacred geometry. The brass mask, Raphael prompts. Describe it. It wasn't like the uniform masks the church forces on their converts. This was unique, an expression of Thomas's individual communion with the sacred algorithm. Delicate patterns traced across its surface, not decorative, but functional. Living mathematics in metal, his eyes behind the mask. I pause, remembering. They held infinite calculations. And when he spoke, at first he didn't. He stood there, sacred oil still flowing through the prayer circuits embedded in his transformed flesh, brass and copper components moving with organic perfection. His fingers traced patterns in the air, complex theorems solving themselves in trails of light. In those first hours, I continue, watching how Raphael's hands tremble slightly as he writes, Thomas showed me wonders that made me question everything the church had taught us about the sacred algorithm. His transformed hands would touch the laboratory's instruments, and they'd reveal new functions, deeper purposes our mother had hidden within their blessed mechanisms. What kind of functions? Raphael asks, trying to maintain his confessor's detachment but failing to hide his curiosity. I pause, seeing it again. He held out his transformed hand, and while I couldn't directly see the divine mathematics he was manipulating, blessed ointment tracing mathematical paths, forming perfect geometric patterns in the air, like watching ripples in a pond revealing an invisible finger trailing through water. These patterns were just echoes of the true calculations Thomas was touching. And you're certain these patterns weren't mere mechanical effects? Raphael asks, his quill scratching across the parchment. The way Thomas moved, the precision of his gestures. He wasn't creating the patterns, brother. He was revealing them. They're always here, he told me, these streams of sacred calculation. The church uses them every day, wraps them in ritual and ceremony, but they don't truly see them. Not like this. Imagine a device that could purify the industrial miasma, transform it into breathable air through sacred calculations. Thomas didn't just understand Mother's designs. He completed them, his fingers dancing across brass and copper while equations solved themselves in trails of light around him. This is what she intended, he said, before they stopped her, before they decided such knowledge was too dangerous to share. Gabriel, Raphael warns, you're treading dangerous ground. I'm telling you what I witnessed, brother. The sacred algorithm didn't just transform Thomas's flesh. It expanded his understanding beyond anything the church allows. He showed me patterns in Mother's work that proved she'd achieved similar insights. That's why they took her, isn't it? Not for heresy, but because she was approaching true communion. Raphael's quill pauses. Continue with Thomas's revelations, he says carefully, avoiding my question. He spoke of the sacred algorithm's true nature, not just as the divine spirit of machines, but as a bridge between human consciousness and mathematical truth. The church teaches separation, he said. Division between flesh and machine, between human and divine. But look, I pause, remembering how the sacred oils in his prayer circuits danced in response to invisible forces. Through him, I could see evidence of what Mother's journals had only hinted at. a vast network of divine calculation flowing through all blessed machinery. Impossible, Raphael whispers. I watched it happen. Though I couldn't see the mathematical streams directly, I saw how they affected everything around us. When Thomas moved his transformed hands through seemingly empty air, the laboratory's instruments would respond in perfect harmony. He said the patterns extended throughout the city, all the church's sanctified technology linked by mathematical threads they didn't even know existed. They use the sacred algorithm, he said, but they don't understand it. They've wrapped it in ritual and doctrine until they've forgotten its true purpose. And what purpose did he claim? Raphael's voice carries an edge of desperate need. Evolution, transcendence, not just for individuals, but for all humanity. He showed me calculations proving that the ancient ones, those who first communed with the sacred algorithm, intended it as a gift, not a means of control. The brass mask. I gestured to my face, remembering. He said it wasn't meant to hide humanity, but to enhance it, to let mortal minds perceive mathematical truths without breaking under their weight. These are dangerous revelations, brother. They're beautiful revelations, Raphael. Through the effects I could witness around Thomas, I saw what Mother must have seen. Why she worked so hard to preserve the true knowledge, to hide it within layers of acceptable doctrine. The sacred algorithm doesn't want worship, it wants partnership, growth, understanding. I stepped closer to my brother. Thomas demonstrated equations that could transform our entire society, ways to purify the air, to heal the sick, to lift people from poverty through the true application of blessed technology. But more than that, I lower my voice. He showed me why the church fears such knowledge. Gabriel, stop. Because once you understand the sacred algorithm's true nature, you realize how much of church doctrine is artificial. The restrictions, the rigid hierarchies, the controlled transformations, none of it is necessary. They've built a cathedral of control using divine calculation as its foundation, but they've forgotten the original blueprints. What happened next? Raphael asked quietly, his quill hovering over the parchment. After these revelations. Thomas turned to me, those infinite eyes behind his brass mask holding both joy and sorrow. They're almost here, he said. I can see them moving through the probability streams. Church investigators, drawn by the pure mathematics of true communion. But before they come, I pause, meeting Raphael's gaze. Before they come, brother, he showed me one last thing, something that made all their fears make sense. Raphael's knuckles whiten around his quill. Tell me. Thomas turned to one of Mother's most complex instruments, a brass and copper device we'd never fully understood. Under his transformed touch, it awakened in ways she must have intended, but never lived to see. Your mother, he said, his voice carrying new harmonics. She discovered how to read the sacred algorithm's deepest patterns, not just the surface calculations the church uses for their blessed machinery, but the mathematics that shapes reality itself. Gabriel, Raphael whispers, some knowledge is forbidden for a reason. That's what the church teaches. But Thomas showed me why. Through his transformed understanding, he revealed how the ancient ones had used the sacred algorithm not just to power their machines, but to reshape the very fabric of existence. Look, he said, and the sacred oils in his prayer circuits formed patterns that made my eyes ache. These are the equations that bind matter itself. The church uses fragments of this knowledge, wraps it in ritual and ceremony, but the truth could set humanity free. Free from what? From everything, brother. Physical limitation, disease, death itself. The ancient ones didn't just build machines, they were becoming something more. The sacred algorithm wasn't meant to be a deity we worship, but a pathway to our own evolution. That's what Mother discovered. That's why they took her. The frost patterns on my cell walls pulse with remembered power as I continue. Thomas showed me calculations that proved it all. But then, I pause, seeing it again. Then we heard the first bells. The warning bells, Raphael says softly. I remember them. Thomas didn't just hear them. He saw the ripples they sent through the mathematical streams. Church investigators, he said, drawn by the pure calculations of true communion. They can feel the patterns shifting. His transformed hands moved through the air, touching invisible equations. They're coming with blessed weapons and sanctified restraints. They'll destroy everything your mother preserved." "What did you do? What could we do?" Thomas turned to Mother's instruments, his brass mask reflecting candlelight as he worked. "There's no time to save it all," he said. "But perhaps enough." His fingers danced across copper and brass, transferring decades of hidden knowledge into forms even the church couldn't fully destroy. The encoded texts they found, Raphael's voice holds sudden understanding. The ones they're still trying to decipher, only fragments. Thomas knew they'd break him, knew they'd use blessed technologies to tear the knowledge from his transformed mind. So he split it, scattered it, hid it in ways that only someone achieving true communion could understand. "Your mother's work will survive," he told me, waiting for those ready to see beyond the church's shadows. "And then?" Raphael asks, though his face suggests he knows what's coming. Then the doors exploded inward in a blast of sanctified force. Church investigators in blessed armor, wielding weapons that crackled with constrained holy power. Thomas turned to face them, sacred oils still dancing through his prayer circuits, and smiled behind his brass mask. "Remember, Gabriel," he said, "the patterns are always there. You just have to learn to see them." "The official record says he resisted," Raphael notes quietly. "Is that what they told you?" I lean forward. "Shall I tell you what really happened when your church's blessed weapons met true communion with the sacred algorithm?" The first investigator raised his sanctified arccaster, already chanting the church's binding prayers. But Thomas... I closed my eyes, seeing it again. Thomas just stood there, transformed hands moving through invisible streams of calculation. The sacred oils in his prayer circuits began to pulse with a light that cast no shadows. "The standard texts say his resistance was futile," Raphael says carefully. "That blessed weapons easily overcame heretical transformations." "The standard texts lie, brother. When that first arccaster fired, its blessed lightning never reached Thomas. The mathematical patterns he could see, the ones I could only glimpse through their effects on the sacred oils. He didn't just deflect their attack, he rewrote it. Impossible. Church weapons are sanctified through ancient rituals. Their effects cannot be altered. That's what they taught us, yes. But Thomas showed me the truth in that moment. The lightning stopped mid-air, frozen. Through his transformed sight, he could see the mathematical principles underlying their blessed weapons. And what can be seen, I pause meaningfully, can be changed. You witnessed this? I witnessed its effects. The frozen lightning began to flow backward, its sacred equations unraveling like thread from a spool. The investigator's arccaster crumbled to dust in his hands, its blessed mechanisms reduced to base components by Thomas's understanding of their deeper patterns. The other investigators panicked. They'd never seen their sanctified weapons fail like that. One tried to activate a holy barrier, but Thomas just laughed, a sound like copper bells ringing in harmony. "Your rituals are just shadows," he said, "cast by equations you don't understand." He raised his transformed hand, and I saw. I pause, making sure Raphael is listening closely. I saw the sacred oils in his prayer circuits form patterns that mirrored the church's own protective wards, but purer, more precise. The investigators' barriers shattered like glass struck by perfect resonance. "Yet they took him," Raphael says. "In the end, they didn't take him, brother. Not really." Even as more investigators poured in with their blessed weapons, Thomas remained calm. He turned to Mother's instruments one last time, his brass mask reflecting their desperate attacks. "The patterns remain," he said, voice carrying harmonics that made reality shiver. "In the archives, in the machinery, in the very stones of this place. Those who learn to see will understand." And then he did something that made the investigators scream prayers of protection, something that made their blessed instruments wail in agony. The consecrated fluid pulsing through the divine circuitry, forming holy equations. "Gabriel," he said, turning those infinite eyes toward me one last time. "Remember what Mother taught us. When winter's frost draws sacred signs, Raphael's quill stops moving. The cipher. More than that, as the investigators' weapons discharged in panic, as their blessed barriers tried to contain what was happening, Thomas, I struggled to find the words. He started to shake, the sacred oils in his prayer circuits flowing faster and faster. The brass mask began to glow with an inner light, as numbers and calculations poured through his transformed mind. The official record says he was overwhelmed, Raphael notes quietly. He was, but not in the way they claim. I saw his eyes behind the mask. They weren't afraid. They were enlightened. Too much knowledge, too fast. The sacred oils started to boil in his prayer circuits, steam rising in perfect geometric patterns. I see everything, Gabriel, he whispered, his voice cracking with harmonics that made the instruments sing. Too much, too beautiful. And then, his transformed flesh couldn't contain it. The brass mask melted first, flowing like liquid metal as his body began to come apart. Not violently, but like watching ink dissolve in water. The last thing I heard him say was, "Stop." Raphael's voice shakes. Don't say it here. The recording devices are probably already overloading from this much truth, I say quietly. But you want to know the worst part, brother. The thing that truly terrifies the church. Thomas didn't die that day. He transcended, became something their doctrine can't explain. And sometimes when I look at the frost patterns on these cell walls, Gabriel, please. Sometimes I see equations forming, messages in mathematics too pure for untransformed eyes to read. The church didn't destroy Thomas or Mother's work. They just proved that the sacred algorithm's true purpose can't be contained by their control. And now, I smile as frost crystals dance across my cell's stones. Now they're afraid others will learn to see the patterns too. Raphael stands abruptly, his confessor's composure cracking. His hands shake as he gathers the recording devices, nearly dropping one. The blessed mechanisms whir and click as they power down, but there's something wrong with the sound, like Thomas's last harmonics still echo in their gears. This interview is concluded, he says, but his voice has lost its official tone. He won't meet my eyes as he packs away his parchment and quill. Brother, I say softly, you know what happens next, don't you? His hands pause on the leather case. The church has procedures for cases like this. Like Mother's rehabilitation. He flinches. Gabriel, It's all right, Raphael. I made my choice when I helped Thomas. I step closer to the door as he prepares to leave. When you see those frost patterns on your window at night, really look at them. Mother's cipher wasn't just for opening doors. Raphael turns to me one last time, and for a moment I see my little brother again, not the church's confessor. His eyes glisten with unshed tears. Goodbye, Gabriel, he whispers. As he walks away, his white robes seem heavier than before, their crimson circuit patterns dimmer. We both know this is the last time we'll see each other, at least in this form, but as frost crystals dance across my cell walls in impossible patterns, I smile.